of a mass execution of political prisoners in 1980s in Iran. In my country, execution became the name of the order from the first year of the new regime. Iranian regime, in as early as 4 or 5 months after the change of regime in Iran, started executions. This picture is one of the first public executions in Iran, and the rest you can see in the square. Thousands and thousands of political prisoners, political activists in summer 1988 were simply put before the Death Commission by the order of the supreme leader at that time, Ayatollah Khomeini. Numbers of political prisoners and political activists were simply executed. Those prisoners had already been sentenced, had already been gone through the legal process, and some of them had been incarcerated for more than 8 or 9 years. Some of the people who were executed had already arrested in early 80s. In summer 1988, by the direct order of Khomeini, a committee was formed, and they have one mission, and one mission only: physical eradication of political prisoners and political activists. They were sent to all the prisons in Iran. They formed a sort of kangaroo court. It wasn't even minus similarity to any court. The committee would decide death or no. Prisoners were called before this committee one by one. I have witnessed how my comrades were put before this committee and they end up dead because they have one mission: killing, executions. People were beaten before taken into the court before this committee. They were asked questions where the answers would determine death or life. The question put to them was formed in a way to make sure the number of execution would be as high as possible. Whether you believe in Islam, whether you are ready to betray your comrades, whether you are ready to participate in death squad, whether you are ready to collaborate with the prison guards and information ministry. Those answers, they knew the answers were no. And that's why they wanted the number of the executions to increase daily days. Within less than 3 months, to some estimate, up to 5,000, and to some estimate, up to 12,000 people were executed. In recent years, some of the executioners and ex-interrogators have been talking about over 21,000 people. There was no legal due process for any of them. They were condemned to death even before getting before that committee. And that committee had order from the government, from the supreme leader of Iran. This year is the 31st year of anniversary of those killings. All those pictures you are seeing here are the actual minor examples of what happened. People were executed. The bodies were buried in mass graves. There are families who, after all of these 31 years, they don't know where their loved ones were buried. They were never told about the graveyards. There are some mass graves where people found out. In Tehran, there is a major one called Khavaran. And early in the late summer of 1988, they buried people at night and in a mass graves in that area. Families have been gathering in that particular mass graves every year and ask the question. Families want to know why their loved ones were killed. Now, it's 31st year. No one has accepted the responsibility. No one accepted any responsibility regarding these executions. Islamic Republic of Iran, from top to bottom, were involved in these executions. the regime knowingly planned the executions in 1986 and 1987. Prisoners were called to be questioned about their families, about their backgrounds. In 1986 and 87, they planned these mass executions over 1 year. The top of the regimes, that Khomeini himself ordered the death. Number of people were hanged in Tehran prison. In Isfahan, where I spent 7.5 years, from age of 17 to 24.5, they executed people inside the prison. They have a special place for that. People were called to the solitary confinement and then were taken before this death committee one by one. Among them, there were my comrades who spent more than 7.5 years in prison. They had already been sentenced. They were killed because Khomeini ordered it, and they wanted to get rid of this question. They come up with the answer. Let's wipe out the question. Then there won't be any political prisoners. Since the early year of ruling this government, we have seen executions after executions. European governments ignore it. In 1988, all the European governments just turned a blind eye on those. And still, there hasn't been any international investigation regarding these massacres. The massacres start from this photograph. And now, after nearly 40 years, it still continues. We are the only country in the world where the number of people who have been disappeared has not been recorded. Families whose loved ones were kidnapped from the streets, they don't know what happened to them after more than 30 years. Families have been asking these questions, mothers, fathers, and unfortunately, a year passed and we have lost some of those parents and sisters and brothers. They left us not knowing what happened to their loved ones, why they were executed. Those political prisoners had not done anything. They haven't committed any offense while they were in prison. They even haven't broken the rules in prison. But they were put before this committee. This committee had a mission, and the mission was massacring the political prisoners. And they managed to do that. But we have never left them to think it is over. Every year we came to the meetings and told the world what happened to us. I have a mission in my life to tell everybody what happened to my comrades. Those dark days of summer 1988 witnessed in my country the extent of atrocities that it has not been seen in the recent history. Even if we get the lowest estimate of 5,000 people, why they were executed, no one knows. The questions they asked, they knew the answer was no. Because who was ready to go and participate in the execution of his comrades? The people who resisted in prison for more than 7 years, they would not bend under the pressure, and they knew that. And those people who remained in the prison I was there in Isfahan, we were 180 people. They executed 90 people. They literally killed half of us. The people who were released were under surveillance all the time. It wasn't the fact that they just let us be on our own. Those people who remained alive had this mission to tell the world of what happened to us. 7.5 years, from 1981 to 1989, I witnessed executions after executions. 13-year-old boy were put before firing squad. 14-year-old girl was put before firing squad. Number of teenagers, 16, 17, 18, 19, from 1981. Women were raped before executions. Bodies were buried in a mass grave over 7.5 years, and they haven't told their parents or their loved ones where these bodies were buried. In 1981, at the peak of the executions, every night I witnessed the loss of one of my friends. They were executed because they stood against the regime. They were executed because they stand for liberty, freedom, justice, and equality. They were young people, students, engineers, doctors, nurses, teachers. They were put before the Sharia court. They were charged with the religious offenses where they know the punishment was death. They deliberately do that. They were either unbelievers or heretics. Under the Sharia law, these offenses carry death penalty. Even some of the people who were executed, they were so young, they wouldn't understand the extent of these charges. Ehsan Shafa was 13 years old. His father, his mother were executed. They executed the boy at the age of 13. If you were not executed, you were tortured to death. Safullah Sheikh Sadat Samani, a 19-year-old boy, were tortured to death. All his back was burned with cigarettes. They tortured him and then put his dead body in the cell where I was sharing with him. My comrade stood in the Sharia court and defended what they were fighting for. Bijan Majnoon, 18-year-old boy, stand in front of the Islamic court and defended his belief. He was executed. Lots of large number of young people were put before these courts and they were executed. The regime in Iran has dealt with the opposition with these Islamic courts. Their mission is to kill. Their mission is not to put you on trial. Their mission is to physically eradicate you. And that's what they did. Socialists, the Marxist-Leninists, religious group, every single walk of society had been targeted by this regime. 40 years of mass execution, killing, imprisonment, torture. They haven't stopped. And the European countries are very happy. The governments in Europe are very happy to deal with them, to have economic relationship with them, to have full diplomatic relationship with them. We gathered here today to tell the public that what happened to us in Iran. It started in February 1979 and is still continuing. This is a mass execution in Kurdistan as early as 2 months after the regime took power. And the rest you can see around the square. Some of these photographs, their families, they don't know where they are buried. Mothers, fathers, husbands, sisters, children. They are looking for the grave of their loved ones. They don't want that much. They want simple rights, simple human rights of knowing where your loved one was buried. From top to bottom, the current head of judiciary, Raisi, was a member of this special committee in 1988. Every single member of the Iranian government has their hands in these executions. Every single of them. There is no reformist or right wing or left wing in the Iranian government. They all share the one value, a mass execution of opposition. We don't know how many of our comrades were executed since 1979. Those I witnessed was only what happened in one prison. Major prisons in Tehran, which is called Evin, Gohardash. In other cities, Shiraz, Mashhad, Kermanshah. No one knows how many people they were executed. In Tehran, eyewitnesses for a very short period of 12 days, every night there was executions. I counted 75 single shots which they'd kill with them, and then some of them 45 one next day. In early 1981 to 1982, I witnessed one of the most darkest time of my life. Every day I lost a comrade. We don't know how long we would be left alive. It didn't matter whether you have gone through the so-called legal process. You, a member of the prosecution office, and a mullah. No one to defend you. No due process. The idea of having a lawyer in the court was a joke for them. No lawyers hadn't dared to come and defend anybody in those times. Even now, the lawyers have been put in prison for defending the prisoners, defending their clients. 36 people in 1981, their trial lasted 30 minutes. The judge told them, just tell your name, your date of birth, and the name of your father and the group you belong to. And the judge told them that you only have 30 minutes. All of these 36 people were executed the same day. On one day, in October 1981, Iranian paper published the number of 105 executions on their front page. We have been dealing with the regime in Iran with only dish out death and misery. There is no political group active in Iran who actually can be considered as a minor opposition to the regime. Workers, teachers, doctors, nurses, they don't have any union rights. If they have a slightest, show any slightest opposition against the regime, they will be arrested. A young woman was sentenced to 24 years imprisonment for not wearing a hijab. The problem with the Islamic regime is the only language they understand is the language of power to topple them down, and the force which has to be started by the people. Nobody in Europe has dealt with this issue. None of the governments in Europe, in the EU, has dealt with the issue of how to deal with the Islamic Republic record of human rights. They ignore it. It's 40 years, they ignore it. They know all the groups outside of Iran have given them all ample of evidence to show how people were executed, how due process had never been followed in Iran. They ignore it. Every year in United Nations, there is a resolution against Islamic Republic of Iran. Every year. But what they do, they simply ignore it. Workers have not been paid their salary for months, and if they actually protested, they would arrest them. A student protest, they arrest them. And the consequence is, if you are arrested, you will be tortured to death, and there is no immunity. Nobody would bother those interrogators who rape and torture people. They do it with absolute impunity. They even be rewarded. They turn up to be ministers and the deputy ministers. The people who are directly involved in killing in Desfo were actually rewarded by being a justice minister at the moment. Iran is a country where death is served in the morning, at lunch, and at night. The government has shown the brain sword to everybody. 1988 is the peak of the executions because they didn't know what to do with the prisoners. There were a group of people who have actually tolerated more than 7.5 years in prison, and they didn't say yes to the regime. They didn't know what to do with them. And here come the butcher of Tehran, Khomeini, with his solution. He issued some statement which is nothing less than a direct order, and set these wild judges out to just pass the order of killing. After that, in around October, November, and December 1988, they had the prisoner wiped out in their prison. They killed them. And they did release the rest of them, which I am one of them. But no one can forgive, and we never forget of what happened to us. Europe have seen what fascism did to you. From 1939 to 1945, German fascist government massacres millions. We have solitary confinement in Iran, which is similar to what they have in Auschwitz. They force them to stand. These lot force them to lie down in the area which is as wide as the coffin. All the tactics were used in Auschwitz were exercised upon us. And at the end, they didn't kill us with the gas. They hanged people. What happened in Europe has been repeated in my country. People were killed because they did believe in what the government didn't believe in. Discrimination on the basis of belief is one of the most dangerous discrimination. It's worse than racism because it can eradicate large number of people. If you don't believe in Islam, if you believe in Marxist-Leninism, if you want to act upon your belief, you would face death. That is much more dangerous than discriminating somebody on the basis of color or their religion. Today is the 31st anniversary of that massacre. I have one message for the government in Tehran. We will never let it go. We would not stop protesting against you. And we will not let you think that what you have done is either forgiven or forgotten. Thank you.